Welcome to the Truth Expedition. I'm your co-host, Mark Bashosky. Now, you've tuned into the program where we sift through the garbage, the lies, to try to find the truth in this insane clown show, freak show of a world where fact checkers lie and the government and the media propagandize you and me, the citizens of this glorious world. Once again, got Gunnar Ballstead here, co-host. How you doing, Gunnar?
Doing well. Today we're going to do a deep dive into the vaccine safety signal data. We're going to look at Minnesota and other U.S. states. We're going to try to find out the true impact of big pharma propaganda.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So our guest today is a gentleman who, via FOIA requests, acquired death certificates from Massachusetts and Minnesota. And, he's appeared in front of state legislators. In fact, he just got back from New Hampshire speaking in front of a committee there. And he's been on high-profile shows like The Highwire with Del Bigtree. What he has discovered is, in my opinion, the smoking gun. It's the evidence that intentional homicide has taken place on a grand scale worldwide. He dissected these death certificates and matched them with VAERS reports to find the truth. And what he has discovered should have been breaking news, headline news all over the world on all these major networks. It's the elephant in the room, but they are not reporting it. It is our honor and it is our privilege to be joined by John Beaudoin. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the Truth Expedition and giving us some of your time today.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here. Appreciate the time.
Excellent. So I guess I want to start with, who were you in 2019, before all this pandemic came along? Were you wary of the medical field? Were you aware of the corruption? Or is it this pandemic that kind of woke you up? And what led you to look into this data?
Oh boy. Let me try to keep it short. I've never just believed authority when they tell me something. I've always thought, well, that's not fully right, or I can do it better, things like that. I'm an engineer, so we're kind of sticklers for some processes where we can optimize them a little bit better than the status quo. Most managers just do what you're told. It's like, no, I can do it better my way. And I've always been that kind of guy, pain in the butt to management. So when COVID came, let's see, I had... At 51 years old, I went back to school to get an MBA. My career was in sales of large contracts for things like collision avoidance systems in cars, guidance control system for the Trident nuclear missile, microprocessors, implantable drug delivery systems. So anything electronic, a lot of chip level design, some board level design. I would sell intellectual property design services and software design tools to engineers. And I went back to school, like I said, at 51, just as I was about to graduate. And I went back to school to show my sons that going to school is important. But then my son died right when I graduated. 2 weeks before I finished my last class of my MBA, I didn't go back. They just gave me the MBA because I had enough to achieve a B in that class anyway. So they just gave me a B and said, you're done. So I sat on the couch depressed from 2018 until COVID hit in March 2020. And then I didn't know that the skills I had were any different than anybody else. But the way I was trained, they put like $40,000 of training into me to be able to read people and negotiate at a high level. The contracts, if they were hardware, it would be the equivalent of like a $200 million contract. So I'd be putting together the whole strategic plan and a team of engineers from around the world calling on different locations of companies like ON Semiconductor, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Intel, and so forth. So my middle son said, I don't believe it. I don't believe this thing is going on. I said, no, Charlie, you have to take it seriously. You got to be a good citizen. I don't know what the words I used, but I said, oh, just knock it off and listen to them. You got to take it seriously. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, he's probably right. And I looked up the CDC data. I looked up New York City public health data, which was the best at the time in March and April. And I found an anomaly in the CDC data. And when I wrote to the CDC, they didn't write back, but they took the data down for a day and a half, about 36 hours. And when it came back, they had changed the data. They didn't change the math to that would have fixed the problem. They changed the data, and that was historical data from 2014 through 2018 in that particular file. And so I thought, yeah, you just can't change the data because some guy wrote to you like me, right? And if they change the data for that, what else are they fudging? And then I just looked into everything. I'm like, what do you mean masks? Masks don't work. They're crazy. That's a materials science and fluid dynamics problem. It has nothing to do with doctors. Doctors don't know a darn thing about the tensile strength of the scalpel they're using, or they know how it feels. They know how it feels to cut through a tendon versus a muscle versus fat, right? It feels different. You apply different pressure and it becomes a skill that they have. But they don't know the tensile strength of the steel in their hand. And to know a mask is to understand the material properties and whether or not it can filter. And filtering isn't just particle size. There's a coulombic there's a charge associated with various molecules, and some are going to stick to it, and some are going to be repelled by it. Those are the types of thinking that you need to do in order to understand whether or not masks work. And then, of course, that you have your technicians that know whether masks work. So that's the beginning. And then I sued the governor over the mask mandate, Charlie Baker, governor of Massachusetts, and the health commissioner. I said, you are depriving me of receiving free speech from others because I'm deaf in one ear and I need to see their lips move when they speak. Otherwise, I don't hear them as well. I need to understand people. So by ordering other people to cover their mouths, you're depriving me of receiving free speech. I guess they were afraid of the lawsuit because he rescinded Order 31. He reissued a new order, Order 55, and in paragraph 2B, there was an exception. And in that exception, it's buyer between somebody hearing impaired doesn't have to wear a mask. Two people speaking, buyer between, meaning not only did I not have to wear a mask being hearing impaired, nobody speaking to me had to wear a mask. I could have walked into an auditorium or a bar with 100 people. And when I walked in, nobody has to wear a mask. That's how that rule works. But Massachusetts was so in love with their masks, nobody would follow my lead. And everybody kept wearing them. And I was yelled at. I was sworn at. I was put to the turf 3 times in a full sprint at 56 years old in an over 56 soccer league on a Sunday morning with all these dumbass. I don't know if I could swear here.
You can certainly swear.
All right, all these dumbasses running around a soccer field at 56 to 63 years old, wearing masks on a sunny Sunday morning at 11 o'clock with dew on the ground and sweat flying all over the place, other bodily fluids. They put me to the turf 3 times on an artificial turf in a full sprint. I got fouled from behind. Both my knees were bleeding. I had scabs for 2 months, maybe a little bit more. It was a long time before my knees healed. I mean, if you're in a full sprint, even at 56, and I'm not that slow, and you take out your knees, you just take the skin off your knees 3 times. And and they were yelling and swearing at me. If we have to wear an effing mask, you have to wear an effing mask. I said, I have an exception from the governor. Anyway, so that's how I get into it. And then I heard a 7-year-old girl died from COVID on the radio. She didn't die on the radio. She died, and it was on the radio that they said that. Like, I'm an engineer, right? I got to get my words right.
Sure.
So there's no way she died of COVID. So I put in 7 or 8, I think it was 8 different public records requests. And 7 or 6 were, all but 1 was denied. And the one that was not denied was the entire death certificate database for Massachusetts. And I was working on that for a year, put out a lot of articles. And then somebody said I should talk to, I won't say her name, but somebody in Minnesota. And that person got the death certificates and was doing the same thing. But I do a little more math. The conditional statements I was running on the database allowed me to do more. I don't like to use the word statistical analyses, to envision, to visualize raw data such that anybody can understand what's happening, which is kind of the presentation. Some of the slides will be that type of data that anybody can understand. Nobody understands the research papers, the confidence intervals, the p-values, the box and whisker plots. Those are for all the PhDs. And personally, I don't even think they're worth that much, because we could get in an argument about a normal distribution, a Poisson distribution, other types of binomial distributions, or a uniform distribution. These distribution functions distribute the probability over a set of values. Like if a variable is 0 versus a 10, and it can only be from 0 to 10, the distribution's in there, but does the distribution look like a bell curve? Are there more results concentrated in a narrow point, and then it goes out to the sides? They're called tails, the right tail and left tail. That would be a normal distribution, a Gaussian distribution, or people understand the term bell curve. But if that's not life, life isn't a normal distribution. Sometimes things are in a uniform distribution. It's the same probability that'll happen from 5 to 8, and it will never happen from 0 to 5, and it will never happen from 8 to 10. That would be a uniform distribution. Different things in life are different distributions, and to use a normal distribution all the time and to relate everything to p-values and confidence intervals, when you know that if the government makes a rule, that rule changes the distribution function. If they say, everybody has to wear masks, that's probably a bad example, because I don't think it changed anything in terms of probability. It didn't stop anybody from getting anything, right? We have more than 2 billion examples of people wearing masks, and they all got COVID.
Yeah.
Didn't stop them.
Maybe putting them at more risk.
Yeah, well, it did.
Yeah.
So the 7-year-old girl, actually, if the VAERS record is really hers, and I believe it is, because I have all the death certificates in Massachusetts of 7-year-old girls from Massachusetts, and all the 7-year-old girls from Massachusetts in VAERS reports, and there's only one that lines up perfectly. And I believe it's her. She reacted to the vaccine in 5 minutes. And then she got a second one, and she reacted right away. And the first time she started vomiting within 5 minutes and threw up for 8 to 10 hours. And then the second one, it says she had terrible stomach pain, didn't have a bowel movement for 3 days. And the report ends because if somebody dies, you can't go and update a VAERS report. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. It somehow the system shuts you out. The report's done. That's it. You can't update a report. If it was a good system, don't you think you should be able to update it to say, yeah, this person actually died?
Yeah.
Nope, can't do it. So, she reacted in 5 minutes. She was dead within 5 days. She was injected on the 13th. The report was made on the 15th for the 7-year-old girl in VAERS. And then Cassidy Baraka died on the 18th of January. That was 2022. And the hard part is her death certificate only says in part one, and then I'm going to get to part two to follow up on what you just said. So part one only says the exact phrase, complications of coronavirus 19 viral infection. That's it. Complications of what?
Yeah.
Pneumonia? I don't know. What else did she have? Did she have, was she septic due to a gangrene or a cut on her finger, or what? Nope, nothing. And that particular medical examiner, Michelle Matthews, who is a named defendant in my case, and now it's at the First Circuit Court of Appeals because it was dismissed on standing, like everything is dismissed on standing. So they told everybody she died of COVID when she reacted to the vaccine in 5 minutes and was dead in 5 days. And that's just criminal.
Yeah.
So on part two of her death certificate, it said asthma and it said fungal and bacterial pleuritis. So why do I bring that up? Because you just mentioned the negative consequences of wearing masks. I don't understand why everybody took high school biology. You had these little petri dishes. Most of the time, the bottom was red and the top was clear. Imagine strapping one of those to your face and walking around for 8 hours in a day. People are literally walking around with a petri dish on their faces. You want to grow something in a warm, moist environment. Okay. Well, under that mask is a warm, moist environment. And whatever you're breathing out, if it does get caught in the mask, it's growing. It's multiplying. It has plenty of access to water because you're breathing out steam all the time. You may not see it, it's there. And you know it's moist in that mask. And that moisture in that water provides the basis of life for fungi and bacteria to grow. And they grow. And then when you take a breath, now you have finer particles going deeper into your lungs in a greater assay. That's probably the wrong word. In a greater amount of a greater plume of bacteria being sucked deeper into your lungs, where you can fight off the smaller groupings that you have naturally. Now all of a sudden you're breathing in a whole chunk of it, and you get sick. You get pleuritis. So, and that was not contributing to her death, but she did die with that. So that's how I got into it. I got her records. I said, I got to figure this out, and that was one of the things I asked for, and they gave us the whole database, and then I started analyzing it, and now I have a couple of books. The biggest thing is the thesis of the book. I'll say that, and then you can ask questions, or we can get into the presentation. The thesis of the book is that the symptom spectrum profile, it's what I call all the different causes of death across a society at a given time. So the symptom spectrum profile and the age spectrum profile, what ages were people dying of what things, right? And the seasonality profile, when in terms of what time of year did they die? For example, cold and flu season is a season. It's seasonality, right? So you'll have more pneumonia deaths in a cold weather climate like Minnesota or Massachusetts. When it gets cold and dry in the winter, we have more pneumonia and flu and other type deaths like that. And so that is a seasonal pattern. And you'll see more people die in the winter than the summer. It's kind of sinusoidal. And so the symptom spectrum profile, the age spectrum profile, and the seasonality profile changed starkly on a year boundary from the year of COVID in 2020 to the year of COVID gene drug therapy that they call vaccine in 2021. And on a year boundary, as soon as they started vaccinating, the thrombocytopenia and heart attack and myocarditis and pulmonary embolism and acute post-hemorrhagic anemia deaths all shot up. Cardiac arrhythmia. It wasn't just young people dropping dead on sports fields. They wiped out a ton of old people, just took them right off the map. They would have lived another 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, but they're gone. And nobody says anything if an 82-year-old dies. There's a federal judge in Massachusetts had a heart attack. Like, oh, doctor told me I had a heart attack because I'm old. The guy was playing hockey at 81, and then he has a heart attack. It's like, oh, why can't you connect the two? That was my judge, by the way, who dismissed my case. All right. With all that said, I can get into the causes if you want to. If you want me to screen share, or if you want to. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, we will, lots of them, but let's go ahead and start your presentation. We've got questions, but I think the presentation is important and will lead to more questions. So I think feel free, John.
All right. How's the video?
Looks good.
All right, very good. For everybody, this has been adapted from a presentation that was given in Florida by Dr. Michael Uffuse. So if you see anything related to that, that's probably a mistake that I forgot to delete out of here. Okay. I have 2 publications right now. The CDC memorandum is kind of that's the spiral bound. It's actually a spiral. That's not what it looks like on the screen. It's an 8.5 by 11. It's probably 3/4 of an inch thick, maybe 320 pages, 400 graphs, 100 and probably 130 pages of enumerated paragraphs of factual evidence. It is written like a legal memorandum. It has a letter to prospective. Well, it's to the CDC, FDA, and NIH directors, and 13 of their deputy directors, and it warns them: get a lawyer, because if they don't act upon this information and more people die, they are responsible for murder. And I get into the elements of murder. I do a legal analysis of the facts. After that, it's all in the CDC memorandum, but it's a really difficult read for regular people. It's a deep dive into the legal analyses are cursory, but you still have to know a little bit about the law. But people like it though. I was shocked. I thought I'd only sell 500, and I'm selling as many of that as I am the book, which is on the right side here. It's the real CDC. People ask what that means. If you notice in the CDC memorandum, the D is uppercase, but in the book it's lowercase. That's because the book is that it went to the CDC. The CDC was addressed by that book. Whereas the real CDC, the name above that is coquin à chien, and that means the bad dog in French. That is the nom de plume, or the pen name that I use to write my articles. And serendipitously, the initials of coquin à chien is CDC with a little d, because of coquin de chien, or chien in Quebecois French, coquin de chien. So the book is for everybody, and they both can be found at therealcdc.com. And when I say for everybody, it starts out, on St. Patrick's Day of 2020, I was sitting in a bar and I was getting nervous because people were too close and there was this disease everybody was talking about. So I left my beer at the bar and walked out. That's how it starts. All right. The thesis I just mentioned is the symptom spectrum profile, age spectrum profile, and seasonality profile of excess deaths changed starkly coincident with the introduction of COVID vaccines. Viruses don't change how they kill, whom they kill, and when they kill on a year boundary. Something else began killing people in 2021, and it was definitively not COVID. Minnesota, official death record, Bill. Some of the last names are in, actually, I changed all the names for Minnesota. So the names are different for Minnesota. I was requested to change the names. The Massachusetts data, the Vermont, the Washington, the New York, those are all real names. But I'll just say, so Bill was 78 years old, and on his death record, part 1, sudden cardiac death in less than a day. Part 2, COVID vaccine, second dose, 10 hours prior to death. So he gets dose 2, and he has sudden cardiac death in 10 hours.
Yeah.
How do you figure that? And it was, some of these were coded and some of them weren't. So Becky, also from Minnesota, 77 years old, cardiac arrest for unclear reasons. Part 2, second dose of coronavirus vaccine the day before her cardiac arrest. They didn't tell you about these. This is 2021, February 24, 2021. We're talking like 7 weeks into the vaccine program. And people are dying on the day of or the day after. And they're hiding it from the public. These are real. I have the death records. Julia, 77, March 2021, myocardial infarction, so a heart attack. COVID vaccination, 2/27/2021. 21. So that's 28 days in February. So that's 3 days. She had a heart attack in 3 days and died. Myocardial infarction for Francis, 65 years old. 65 is not old. I'm going to be 60. We were talking, I heard you guys talking about exercising and what to do. And I still lift weights, but I don't lift to. It's very difficult to gain muscle. But I'll swim 3,000 yards tomorrow, fast. For an old guy fast, not for a kid fast, but still try to swim 3,000 yards. This guy was only 65. I don't know his health condition, but he was reporting chest pain, and he had the COVID vaccine on March 5th. So, in 12 days, you're dead, but you got chest pain on the 11th. So that was in 6 days. And that was just a report of chest pain. He might have had it earlier. So he had onset of symptoms within 6 days and death 12 days. Gerard, 68 years old, heart attack in less than 4 hours, adverse reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine in less than 4 hours. I believe this one actually was coded by the CDC with Y59. I'll explain that in a few minutes. So the CDC in Minnesota path reviews identified heart sections with multiple foci of full thickness myocardial hemorrhage. So the myocardium, the heart muscle itself, was hemorrhaging. And inflammatory cell infiltrate, probably eosinophils, white cells attacking the heart. Also, foci of inflammatory cell infiltrates in endothelium and epicardium. So what they're telling you is the sac that holds the heart muscle itself, and the inside lining of the vessels and where blood flows within. They were all being attacked. Sorry about the Florida thing on the bottom. I knew I forgot to delete something.
No worries.
All right. So here's an example of Massachusetts. So a 62-year-old woman had a stroke in March of 21. A 30-year-old woman had a stroke in April of 21. And a 17-year-old girl had a stroke in June of 21. That's 3 women in 3 months. And yeah, it's 3 months if you look at it fiscally, because I know when the dates are in each of these. So it's March 15th to June 11th. And that's less. So three deaths in 3 months. It's just terrible. If they had investigated Diane Dubois' death, 62 years old, then Brianna McCarthy would be alive today. She was 30, and Eden McDonald would also be alive. And if you skip down to the second and the last line, Maya, I won't say the last name because she's young. She was given 3 vaccines on August 3rd, 2022. Excuse me, 4 vaccines. She got 4. She was given her 3rd COVID vaccine. She was given the HPV, meningococcal, and Tdap. She got 3 in her left arm, 1 in her right arm. She probably had symptoms right away. I can only tell from the data that she died on August 29th. She died in the same month she got her 4 vaccines on the same day. And she died from a stroke at 12 years old. And then a 16-year-old girl died from lymphohistiocytic myocarditis in October 2022, running cross country. Picture of health, right?
Yeah.
Cross country runners, they have to be. 20-year-old woman, this is the eosinophilic myocarditis. December of 2021, she was a civil engineering student, Merrimack College, Abby. The 7-year-old girl I told you about, I say it was gastrointestinal ischemia because the write-up tells me that that's likely what it was, but it doesn't say that on the death certificate. So that is my interpretation of the data based on the description of death. But they know, the state knows. And the 11-year-old boy got his booster shot late November of 22. On December 3rd, he died. He had chest pains, trouble breathing, went to the hospital. They put him on a ventilator so they could get their extra money from the CARES Act. And they tried to use his heart for a transplant. They couldn't use it because it was full of clots.
Just unreal.
So Minnesota data. Here we go.
Yeah.
The immune mechanism is D8. What that means is there are these codes associated with each cause of death. This is the D8 category. So it's probably D80, 81, 82, 83. And then of the D8 zeros, there's D80.1, D80.2, and so forth. So there are a lot of specific ones. When you get to smaller numbers, you just have to go up the hierarchy and aggregate as much as you can to see a signal. And what you see here on the right side, these are fiscal years beginning in July 1st. I changed over to using fiscal years because in the first year of COVID, the first wave was in the spring. So it's solely in 2020. And at the end of the year, you have the first half of the second wave beginning in November, and the second half in January and February, and a little bit in March. And so your first year for COVID would look like the full first wave, half of the second wave, and then the second year would look like the second half of the second wave and the first half of the third wave, which is usually smaller. So what you're getting is a misrepresentation of what's happening in a seasonal climate. So if I use July 1st, that's why I went to fiscal years. And what you see here in the fiscal year is that it didn't go up in the first half of 2020, this immune mechanism. And, I'm not going to get into like what's happening because all the scientists are arguing that they don't really know. So how would I know? The point is that it is happening. Okay, why is it happening? What is it? Bolus injections? Is it, the LNPs are affecting your marrow and lymph such that you're not regulating the number of white cells you should have? That's a plausible theory. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that it is happening and something caused it. And if you just stop doing what's causing it, that'll solve the problem instead of studying for 10 years what is causing the problem while people continue to get the shots and die. So here you have 107 was the highest of the first 5 years. And you've got almost double that by the time you get to 22, second half of 22 and the first half of 23. It's an enormous gain. And these are people, okay? It's nearly 100 people, and then 70 people, it's 170, and then another 30. So you've got 200 excess people with a single group of D8 codes. That's a lot of people. Oh, it says right up top, 113 excess deaths in 21 and 22, more in 23. Yeah, so that's where I got to 200. All right, so pulmonary embolism, I said, was big. There were a lot of vaccinations in 21. People got the first 2 shots because one isn't good enough. You need 2. Oh, but they wear off, so get a third. Oh, but now you need them every 6 months. If they knew what they were doing, they would have told you at the very beginning. But the shots don't work. So for them to try to pretend that they work, they keep telling you to take more. And for your audience, if you go to YouTube and type in Rawhide Season 2, Episode 14, watch it. It is funny. And it's sad. It's funny and it's sad because one of the lines is, vaccination, that's a fraud, I tell you, a fraud. And there's another line that says, well, how come he died? And the doctor says, well, we don't know when he got it, when he got his vaccination. It could have been 7 years ago or 7 months ago. And another guy says, 7 years, 7 months, 7 hours. What's the point? How do you know? When do you take it? And the doctor says, well, that's why we don't know how long they last. That's why you just have to keep taking them. So there's your 1959 TV show.
Yeah.
With the same kind of rhetoric. We've been programmed for, over 100 years about vaccines. I took my vaccines, that not the ones they have today. I got my course of 6 or whatever. I don't take any more. I'm deaf in one ear from getting a shot when I was a kid, but take a look at this pulmonary embolism. What this is in 21 and 22 alone, there's about 300 and something excess deaths in Minnesota. You see where it just it's going up anyway. What I do is I use linear least squares approximation where I approximate a line. And that line would kind of come right up here. You could say this first one, the 914, well, you can approximate a line that incorporates that kind of just below it. So there's a little extra. And a lot of old people died there, in that first wave. And they died with a pulmonary embolism, some of them. But then you have these astronomically high numbers that no matter what kind of line you put on here for a trend, they're too high. And by the time 22 rolled around, maybe I don't know. I would have to look at the Minnesota data in terms of the vaccination. I would bet you guys were down to 20% vaccination rate, probably fewer. I'll bet you're in single digits now. Nobody's taking this thing, and that's why it's going down. So the fact that it went up with the vaccine and down with the vaccine kind of tells you it might be the vaccine, the gene drug therapy that they call a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Aortic dissection. It's kind of an up-down graph, but that 132, at the point at which most people got vaccines, got gene drug therapies they call a vaccine, they're blowing holes through people's aorta. The lipid nanoparticles, they transfect your endothelial cells, the inner lining of your blood vessel. So imagine all these little particles attached to the inside of your blood vessel in one spot. Happens to be at the aortic arch. And then they slide into the cells, and the cells say, hey, you're not human. They call out to the T cells, come kill me. The T cells come by and they start killing the cells. Eventually, you're going to end up with a little hole. And if you have a little hole at the highest pressure point, well, it's going to blow, and then you die. Arterial thromboses. I'm going to go a little bit faster here.
Okay.
Let's see, 338. You can see on the right, these are clots in your arteries. Okay, those are very high. And it's even worse if you look at the veins. These are clots in your veins. This is not normal. And every one of these graphs is additive. They're not additive when there's an overlap and people die of multiple things, right? Most of these are not overlapping. So you have to add up all like this was 47, that was 43, 428 extra deaths from pulmonary embolism, 113 from the immune mechanism. These add up to, over 1,000. And I haven't even gotten to the big categories. So 33 excess deaths in lymph vessels and nodes. That's an I-89. And you see the graph just going crazy here. If the last one wasn't there and the graph were tuned to these in the red ellipse here, you would say, wow, those 2 years are really high, because they are really high relative to the 38, 30, 40, 44, and 48. But man, that 22 to 23, the fact that it's still going up, that's pretty scary. Nerve root and plexus disorders. So this is, now you're into the neurological codes, the G codes. And you see that it's very high. That's an extra 14 deaths. Hydrocephalus, this is very anomalous. There's no year that looks like this. It just takes off in 22. Disorder of brain, it's kind of a generic category where there's a lot of stuff going bad in the brain. And you can see on the bar graph, this is very high. But we haven't really talked about the line graphs because, the bar graphs are pretty much showing it. But take a look on the line graph. It's just not like the other years. The gray years are the 2015 through 2019 are in gray on the bottom. And 2020 is in black. And somewhere around the middle of the year, it jumped up. Was that COVID? Is COVID causing these? I actually think there is a component of COVID that if it gets past your mucosal defenses, it does the same thing as much of the vaccine. I do believe that because there were clots in people. But The odds of it happening from COVID are about 1/100th that of the vaccine. The reason is your lungs will filter out much of what's in the air, all the pathogens, and it'll fight them at the front, right? The front, the battlefront being your lungs. But if you bypass your lungs, things don't really generally get in your body unless you eat them or, or breathe them in. But now we're taking this strange new product called a gene therapy drug and injecting it past all of your defenses and breaking the skin and injecting it deep within your muscle tissue, sometimes hitting a vein. Other diseases of spinal cord, another one that's really high. Cancers, bone and articular cartilage cancer, very high. And of course, it's later. It took a little while for that one to kick up. It breaks out of the gray around February of 2022 and never returns. Unspecified site, another kind of dumping ground for the software at the CDC to put, cancers. Maybe they just write neoplasm or sarcoma or some generic word. They don't know where to put it, so it goes in this malignancy of unspecified site. And at 810, although it seems like it might be in line with the others, it's not. It's very high. Everything is relative. Ceteris paribus. This is a perfect line going up, and then there's a deficit, which is made up for here. But then, why is that there? Follicular lymphoma. This is all Minnesota, by the way. I've just been showing you Minnesota. 10 excess deaths in 22, more in 23. It's obvious something is wrong. This just doesn't happen. Acute myeloblastic leukemia. Hematopoietic and related tissue and lymphoid. So hematopoietic cells are your blood stem cells. So your body will make those things, and then they'll get shipped off to different places to become either a red cell, a white cell, or a thrombocyte, platelet. And what you see here are very low numbers, except it's now 3 to 6 times the normal rate. It's just saying that here's one example. There are many, and these all add up to a lot of death in Minnesota. Independent multiple sites, 22. You see it going crazy here, right?
Yeah.
These are all real people. These aren't just bar graphs. Every pixel on these bar graphs represents human beings. And then
Look at that.
not only is the vaccine bad, but we have this problem of centralization of authority. And the NIH puts out these protocols, and they tell them to use these drugs. Well, a lot of people think that this is caused by remdesivir. I'm not so sure. It might be a combination of remdesivir and vancomycin, or baricitinib and vancomycin, or baricitinib and remdesivir. The fact that I don't know what it is, and I won't say what it is because I really don't know, and other people think they know because the data lines up. The real issue is that the government isn't looking at this. This is 1,600 excess deaths alone from a single cause of death, acute renal failure, sudden kidney failure. And it happens in hospitals. It doesn't happen at home. So they're doing this to people. It is the protocol that is doing this to people. And they won't study it. So they're just killing people. And why would they do that? Well, there's an extra 20% for using remdesivir. There's extra money for using a ventilator, which then you get a bacterial lung infection, septic, and then you get your vancomycin. And so these protocols the government has put upon us are what's killing people, not necessarily COVID. You go in with a positive COVID test, and all of a sudden you're on all kinds of drugs, you're ventilated, and you're dead from acute renal failure. 1,600 in Minnesota, 2,000 in Massachusetts. If you throw in 2023, it's like 2,400 from Minnesota, 3,000 from Massachusetts, 150,000 excess acute renal failure deaths in the United States in the last 3 years. Worst epidemic of anything in the last 100 years in the United States. and they won't look at it.
Wow.
They're selling drugs.
Yep.
They're pushing the drugs and they're not studying the effects, purposely not studying them. So, you know what? I was talking about this the whole time. This is Massachusetts. This is Minnesota. I've done this in my sleep. So
You said
I
the
was just,
numbers. You said the numbers right though. So
yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, it's Massachusetts was 2000, and here's Minnesota. Sorry. So what you have is 1,300 miles apart. You see the same signal. And I have another state. I'm not saying what it is and when I'm going to be done with the data. I hope a couple. We have some people working on it, and it's going to be big news that when you get to 5% of the population of the United States, I think that's the biggest study in the world with specific data, where I can look at how many people died of these five causes, four causes, three, two, one. I can look at combinations of causes. Did they have a pulmonary embolism with COVID or without COVID? Did they have pneumonia with COVID or without COVID? Um, all that's coming out. But what you see here is basically hospital homicides. And it's not the sad thing is it's not just really old people. This goes all the way down to the 25. It goes down to the 16-year-olds. If they get somebody in the hospital that's 16 years old, maybe has Down syndrome or learning disabled or cerebral palsy or something, they'll kill them. They don't care. They think they're doing the family a favor.
yeah.
I'm sorry, but these people are downright evil. They don't care that they're going to kill your kid. This is the 25 to 44 age group. 63 excess deaths in Minnesota in 21 and 22, more in 23. It's probably approaching 100 people in the 25 to 44 age group who have young kids. Or, a 25-year-old might have 50-year-old parents. They lose their kid. I was, I don't know, I was 54 when I lost my son. My life ended. So I'm just trying to save kids and people from getting killed by the government. They're purposely not studying this. I'm one man. The system I put together to analyze all this stuff, I'm just one guy doing it. And I put together a system that it can be used as an early warning system, such that if you were to take it and hook it up to the data real time for Medicare, Medicaid, vital records, and the immunization database, the doctors aren't all talking to each other every day. But if 4 people died in 4 different corners of the state of the same thing, within a couple of days, the system would flag that as an anomaly, and they would have to go out and study. Is this a disease? Did the person just really randomly have a pulmonary embolism? Did they randomly have bowel ischemia? My system can find that. It can also go back, once you put in all the records, throw in some artificial intelligence algorithms off the shelf, and voila. 39 years ago, in these 3 zip codes, there was an increase in B-cell lymphocytic leukemia. Really? Let's go look at the water reports. What was in the water during that time? I'm one guy put together a system that's far better than anything 250,000 employees from 50 states and the federal government from all the health departments have not put together. In fact, they're hiding the data. Their job is to protect pharma so they see it, not to protect the people. I'll
John,
move fast, Mark. Okay. Bullous pemphigoid. My uncle died with some open lesions on his legs. He died from turbo cancer and pericarditis as a bonus. And I looked up the skin thing, and I was like, holy crap, look at this. That's Massachusetts on the left, Minnesota on the right. These are 2 different states, 1,300 miles apart, with different culture and practice in the medical examiner's offices. And yet you came up with the same signal. That's kind of weird, huh? What is going on with the immune mechanism that these open wounds are not healing? I go through the age spectrum profile. The average age, I told you, dropped 16 years. In the middle ground, this is complicated. I won't go through this too much. All you have to know is COVID this arrow, that's the average age of COVID. It's within the range of excess death. So excess matches COVID. The second one down, the excess death range is in the gray. COVID is nowhere near the range. Nowhere near the range. So if the average age of excess death drops 16 years, COVID is here. It can't be COVID. How can COVID cause the excess deaths if the excess deaths are much younger than the average age of COVID? It can't be. It's not COVID. That's why I've proven through symptom spectrum profile, age spectrum profile, and seasonality profile that it is not COVID killing all these people since 2021. And I'm gonna break now. If you guys have any questions, let me know. The books can be found at therealcdc.com. It's much cheaper than Amazon. I sell it for 25. I have it on Amazon for 40 for the Real CDC. And that was for that last part was special for the show in Florida. So don't pay any attention to that.
Yeah, that's mind blowing. So that's like, I've read Ed Dowd's book and followed his work, and it's fantastic. This is like just detailed. I mean, it's mind blowing. And the data was 143 or so thousand excess deaths in the United States in 2023 from January to July. I figure, if that trend continued, which it probably did, you're looking at, let's say 250,000, and that's being very conservative, excess deaths in the United States. I think in Minnesota alone, we're looking at about 5,000 excess deaths just in 2023 minimum. And I guess that's just a comment. My question is, do you think this is intentional? The release of the virus, do you feel like this is a genocide?
Yeah, I try not to go over my skis here. It's outside my lane, but I can comment on what's plausible and not plausible. For people who think that's a conspiracy theory and it's not plausible, I think that they just don't know what they're talking about. That is a very plausible theory that it was intentional because the spread pattern doesn't make any sense. And the fact that the spike protein got on there, how did it get on that? It doesn't make any sense. It had to have been put there by man. That was an engineered virus. They added a sequence to put the spike protein in there. And then we create a vaccine, and they take the worst part, the most dangerous of the entire virus, the spike protein, and that's what they're going to code for so that you can then combat the most dangerous thing. So how do you do that? Well, you're going to have to grow it. It turns your cells in your body into a factory. So when you say they, though, they is, third person plural pronoun. Who are they? That's a good question. I think a lot of people are just, even at Moderna, even at Pfizer, everybody has a job and they know what their job is. It's very, 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 very few at the highest level who know fully what's going on. And those are your sociopaths. Those are your, a lot of scientists and engineers. I called on a lot of companies, done a lot of deals. And when you pour your career into something and you're on the verge of a breakthrough, and then you think you got a breakthrough and you're going to be shipping product, it's your baby. And a lot of these guys are kind of weird, right? It's their baby. And they don't want to give up their baby. They don't want their baby to die. And so they might fudge a number here and there to make the product viable in the market. And people may or may not find out, or if they do find out, it'll be years down the road when something fails. There have been a lot of engineers who've gone to prison, a lot of company founders who've gone to prison for lying about their products and misleading stockholders. There are some guys, they were putting bricks in boxes and shipping them and calling it revenue. And the customer gets a brick and returns it. It doesn't hit the books till the next quarter. Worry about the next quarter. Next quarter, we need to make numbers now. So do I think it was on purpose? It is absolutely plausible that it was done with intent. Was it intent to sell vaccines or intent to kill people to reduce the population of the world like a Malthusian? I don't want to make fun of that because I actually believe that, but I don't want people to think I'm crazy, so I don't talk about it a lot. There are people in certain circles at certain levels that know. Let's take the CARES Act, for example. Right? The CARES Act is a behavioral modification device. The people who wrote that knew the behavior that would flow from the act. They knew that if you incentivize people being put on ventilators, more people will be put on ventilators, whether they need it or not. And they knew that the kill rate was around 80 to 86%. They did it anyway. That wasn't done because, oh, we need more ventilators because it's a respiratory virus. No, it was done to drive the death numbers for COVID. They knew what would happen. They, again, who's they? Very few people. But when you centralize the authority and you centralize opinion, and you have a bunch of robot doctors who've learned evidence-based medicine since 1992 in every medical school in North America, they all just fall in line and they do what the literature says. They all sound like robots, like they're in some kind of cult. What does the literature say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will do that. I have a joke on Twitter. I say they're all Dr. Burgundies. I don't know if you know Ron Burgundy from Anchorman.
Yeah.
There's a scene where, oh, who wrote the question mark on the teleprompter? Ron Burgundy will say anything that teleprompter says. Doctors will prescribe anything the NIH tells them to. They don't think anymore. And they could not have pulled this off 10 years ago. Would not have happened. Because the older doctors who think for themselves and were in medical school before 1992 would not have allowed this to happen. They would have fought back harder. But they aged out. They're not in the ERs anymore. It's too much of a grind. You don't see 60 and 70-year-old guys as emergency room doctors. It's too much of a grind. And the young guys are all indoctrinated into EBM that came out of Canadians' revision of their healthcare system in the mid-1960s by their Canadian Healthcare Act that revised how medical schools are going to teach and how healthcare is going to be distributed. And it was kind of honed at the McMaster University. And the term evidence-based medicine came about around 1981 with some papers, but it really rolled out that we're all going to do this in 1992 across all of the United States. Thanks a lot, Canada. So, yeah.
John, what role did the media play in this? I know MSNBC just came out with an article that said that there's no link between the vaccine and heart attacks or myocarditis. In the study, in the article, they show that they looked at 3 death certificates that were inconclusive. Is 3 death certificates sufficient? What kind of propaganda is that?
Well, it's pretty bad propaganda, but the people that listen to those programs are not very bright. They're easily programmed, and the propaganda, which means propagating in Latin, right? They're just propagating misinformation, disinformation. No, it's ridiculous. People think we have a democracy. I just wrote an article. Democracy is dangerous to our republic. You know how it's like, this is dangerous to our democracy. You've seen the meme where all the news people are saying it. MSNBC, CNN, they're all, and every single local news channel around the country said the same thing because they're all a bunch of dummies. They're a bunch of puppets, and they repeat whatever they're told. They can't, most of these people have trouble tying their own shoes. The news personalities are not that bright. The smart ones end up leaving because they know the truth and can't take it anymore. Or they tell the truth and they get fired, like Tucker, right? Tucker's telling the truth. They had to get rid of him. I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did. Bongino, I don't know if he was fired or left, but he wanted to tell the truth. He can't work within that environment because they're all lying. So I don't know how to tell you the level of propaganda. Yeah, that's pretty bad, that NBC thing. But they're not thinking. They're just being handed something to read, and it's coming from military intelligence. for Operation Warp Speed was a joint mission between military, DOD, and HHS, right? So CDC and military intelligence. It wasn't about distributing the vaccines. They weren't using personnel carriers from the Army to distribute vaccines. That didn't happen. So what was the military's involvement? The mission was a needle in every arm. Do what you have to do. And the repeal of portions of the Smith-Mundt Act under Obama allowed the military to propagandize the American people. It should never happen, because the propaganda from military intelligence, it's who you're going to war against. So they went to war against the American people and propagandized us, not just by the messages they were saying, but by controlling social media. America First Legal got the FOIAs for that. We know what they were doing. We don't know everything they're doing. I know I was suppressed. They had trolls. There are people who are paralyzed from the waist down, and they're posting, or they lost their child, and they're posting on Twitter. My child got the vaccine and died, and they got attacked by these roving gangs of trolls, I believe were put together by military intelligence. Yep. And if they weren't, then they have the ability to select who gets a voice, whose voice is heard widely or whose voice is suppressed on social media. And just by having a full spectrum of people, they can select who gets the bigger voice so they can get the message out through other people. It's really not that hard to envision.
Yeah, it was the Military Other Transaction Authority, the DOD, that they were behind this. I guess we're almost out of time, but one last question for you, and you kind of touched on it with the censorship. You were suppressed. Do you feel at all? Do you fear your life is at risk with bringing this information to the public?
Well, I mean, do I fear my life is at risk is different than do I think my life is at risk. I have thought at times that I could be taken out, given the fact that I've done something nobody else in the world has done. And it's not bragging. I've been told that by many people with PhDs. I don't fear it. I don't care if I die tomorrow. I lost my son. My time was done then. So I don't want other people to feel what I feel. I want to save them from this feeling. And this is better than going to war. And yeah, I go to the gym. I'm almost 60 years old and I'm ready. I keep fit, not because I want to keep fit. I'm ready to go to war. And the way I do it is I use my keyboard right now. I wrote a couple books. I do analyses. I try to get it out there. I'm going to break free of all this suppression. It's going to happen. People are going to hear from me.
They are.
And I should say us, because there's a lot of us. Wait for the next 2 or 3 months. You'll see.
Yeah, I agree. I think, we're on a cliff. We're at a tipping point, and I think the truth is going to come out. And the work you're doing, it is unique. I don't think there's anyone else in the world doing what you've done and brought this type of information forward. And I can't tell you, I have little kids. I can't imagine the pain you must, and I don't want to imagine it, the pain of losing a child. But I'm grateful to you. Thank you for doing this work to help my kids have a future. Because without people like you with the intelligence and the know-how to bring this information forward, we'd be screwed. Thank you so much, John. I'm so grateful.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in to hit the like button, share. Thanks for tuning into the Truth Expedition. Do not tread on me and do not shed on me.